Hi, I'm State Representative Frank Ryan from the 101st District in Lebanon County, Pennsylvania. We're here today to talk to you about the favorite topic for so many Pennsylvanians, and that's property tax elimination. With me is my dear friend Jim Rodkey for the Pennsylvania Property Rights Association. And what I thought we would do is give you a little bit of background about why the need, and I believe the critical need, and in fact I'm going to say the urgent need to get rid of property taxes in Pennsylvania. Will be unique if we're able to pull it off. But there are certain issues that are taking place that we need to be aware of. But Jim and I both thought it would be a great idea if we started out with the premise that not everybody's convinced that we need to do this. We had a constitutional amendment that was passed and it won by an overwhelming majority, but there were still over 40% of Pennsylvanians who didn't necessarily feel the same way. So Jim and I would like to make the case of what the concerns are that we have about why it's such an onerous tax and a major problem for the Commonwealth and for our very survival, and then go into the proposal in the bill that we're looking at that's called House Bill 13, the School Property Tax Elimination Act. Jim, welcome, and thanks for helping me out so much.
Well, thank you for letting me be here, and so we can have this discussion because it's an important discussion.
You know, Jim, you and I first got to know each other over this issue.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that I think became really important and what you really convinced me of, and for a lot of people who are not aware, I was opposed to the idea initially. And after you spent some time sitting down with me going into the issues and what was involved, you had a very insightful perspective as to what some of the concerns are. So from your perspective, why is it so important that property taxes not be used as a basis for taxation?
Well, to begin with, property tax is not based on ability to pay. You know, there's an arbitrary assessed value that's attached to your home, which may or may not be correct, and honestly, most likely is not. And you have instances, I've read reports, 64% of properties are over-assessed. And essentially what you have is people paying property taxes on property that they don't physically own. That's for the 64%. For the rest, they're not paying property taxes on property they do own. And it starts to create this moral dilemma because the assessment will be what you're going to pay the millage rate on. And it begins this. And the other aspect is, I know if we look back in history, we can go back that this is rooted in feudalism and serfdom. And we've done so much to advance as a society in matters of justice, in matters of civil rights, that I see this as just a blatant abuse of the rights of a homeowner. And Article 1, Section 1 of our Constitution.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting you bring that up because one of the things that when you look at property tax, when I researched it, I looked back at some documents in 1650s, and many of them went back into Great Britain and Europe. And just to be clear with everybody, I was not there in 1650 when this came up. But it started to make me tie in. It's part of what helped convince me that we need to do this. One, it was inequitable. And the second issue that I became really painfully aware of is that when your property becomes a basis of a government spending program, there's really no stopping it. So we develop in my CPA practice, as you know, I'm a CPA, and I specialized in keeping companies out of bankruptcy, spent most of my work and career doing it. We identify in that arena, in my private sector and what I did in the Marine Corps, what we would call critical success factors. And these are items that could have an onerous and disastrous effect on an economy. So one of the things that I often said in this entire spectrum about the issue about property taxes is that when your property serves as a basis for spending across the board, the system of least resistance, for lack of a better word, is actually your property. So if the federal government passes an unfunded mandate, and then the state government does an unfunded mandate, the school board is left with no other option but to then turn around and deal with it. So one of the critical success factors that I've identified, and then you help me with, is this unfunded pension liability. And one of the things I think is pretty interesting, we've got a series of information that will be shown up as an infographic, that in the school year 01 and 02, the employer contribution rate was 1.09%. And if you fast forward to the school year 2019 and 2020, it's up to 34.29% of payroll. So let me tell you what that means to me, and I know you know it as well, but to help other people see it, is that 34% of a school district's payroll is to cover pension costs, most of which are legacy costs. And that's the important point. You know, I get a lot of people who say the school board's spending way too much money, and I'm not here to defend anybody. We're trying to paint the picture. But when you realize that approximately 75% of that payment of 34% that's made is to cover prior service costs and the unfunded pension liability of in excess of $45 billion. If we shut down every school in Pennsylvania right now, you're still going to owe that tax for that unfunded pension liability. Now, I think the Senate made a great step forward, and we passed in the House of Representatives 2 years ago, which just went into effect, a revision in the pension program for new hires, but we won't see the full effects of that for 30 years. So when you look at those issues, and the other thing that I want people to be aware of is that employer contribution rate goes up to 36.3% with the understanding that we don't have another recession. What's your perspective if we have another recession?
I'm looking at from a homeowner's aspect, and I don't see this as being a sustainable future. But I think it goes further. You know, you're talking about the pension contributions here. Sometimes when you talk about eliminating the property tax, people associate that with being anti-education. This is not only an unsustainable future for the homeowner, this is an unsustainable future for school districts. We're talking about 18 years, approximately 18 years, the property tax burden will double. Well, the burden may double, but the number of people being able to pay that, it's just going to continue to be less and less people. And that's going to put an economic strain on our educational system. That's a threat to the teaching profession. So it's a threat to the children in the schools. All the way around, this is hurting the economy of the state, as it's hurting our business community, and we keep having these costs. Certainly we need to address these cost drivers, but I also believe that the property tax is the enabler of many of these issues.
Well, that's actually what you said that convinced me that you have to do it, because the property serves as a checkbook.
Right.
Your equity in your home serves as a checkbook for which no restraint's done. And that's not to be critical of anyone. It's just to say, and one of the things I've often made as a comment in trying to come up with a bill to replace property taxes, I've never seen such a broken and disjointed system that our current leadership team has inherited. They didn't build this. I mean, I have tremendous, you know what, I've only been in the legislature 2 years, and I have to tell you, I have more respect now for the leadership in the House and the Senate than I've ever had my entire life, and I've always had respect for them. They've inherited probably one of the most complicated systems. In my Marine Corps career, I've spent a great deal of time doing economic warfare and spent a lot of time in different nations that have had difficulty. And those cases were complicated. Nothing as complicated as this. So one of the other issues that I run into as a critical success factor is what I call the fair funding formula, where in my mind, the fair funding formula is anything other than fair. And I want people to be aware of why that's so important. I wrote an op-ed piece on this once, where I said the problem with the fair funding formula is that different areas of the state have been held harmless. So as an example, I talked to a person from Indiana County who wasn't real happy about my bill. And on a property that was appraised at about $100,000, she was paying $900 in taxes. In my county, that $100,000 home has got a property tax bill of about $2,400. So when you look at that, I can understand why she wouldn't appreciate the bill. And that's part of what's kept all the other prior elimination bills from passing and why it's been so hard to bring up to be considered and to be voted on. What's your perspective on the hold harmless?
I understand why it was when it was created, but the hold harmless it's like so many things that we find in government. We give it cute little names. We're doing hold harmless for some schools by harming others. What name are we going to attach to those schools? When we're having shifts, and I fully understand, losing 50 kids in a school district isn't going to cut the cost of education. You're still going to have to open up those classrooms. You're still going to have the teachers in those rooms. But we're talking over a long period of time. In some areas, we're talking loss of thousands. Why are the rest of the state? Because people don't understand. They think education funding is all coming out of our property taxes, and it's not. I mean, we're looking at almost $15 billion out of the property tax, but we're looking at a $30 billion funding mechanism here, and the rest of that's coming from the state, some from the federal government. It's all our taxes. All our taxes are going together.
And when you look at that, I think one of the things that's interesting, that hold harmless then ties into this fair funding formula.
Right.
Where you have some cities and some communities getting 70% of their budget from the state, others getting 13 to 14%. And it's, ladies and gentlemen, I can't emphasize enough, that's why this thing is so incredibly difficult to try to fix. Because you do have people that, I find generally speaking, when their property gets reappraised in a countywide reassessment, is typically when those people come on board and say it. The other aspect that is an interesting issue is, and again, I want to be very clear with everyone, we're not determining any, taking a position on any side of what we're talking about. We're just saying, here's some of the issues that we're running into that we think that people should be aware of. The cost of educating children with special needs is another example, where the Federal IDEA Act was supposed to reimburse states by 40% of the cost of special ed. And for those people that don't know me, special education children are important to me. 5 years ago, I walked across the United States to help children with special needs. And that's what I want to do when I leave the legislature again. And I say that because the federal government passed an unfunded mandate that takes priority. So as a result, what you'll start to see is that cost is a valid cost, needs to be paid, and the school districts and candidly the parents and the property owners are between a proverbial rock and a hard place in the special ed needs.
Exactly. I always say there's no such thing as an unfunded mandate. Well, certainly to the school district there is. But eventually that's going to get funded, and it's going to be funded with my house. And that's part of why the property tax is the problem that it is. Because so many people realize, well, they can just get this money through passing it down to the school districts, and the school districts will pass it down to the homeowner. And in the end, the homeowner is scratching his head, and the homeowner is saying, you know, yeah, I hear about these unfunded mandates, but I'm the one who's paying them. So we are funding the unfunded mandates, but we're funding them with our houses, and that needs to change. Again, because the property tax is not based on an ability to pay.
Right. Absolutely. One of the other things that comes in, it's about a property tax issue, and it's a tough issue to bring up. I mean, I've started to talk about House Bill 13, and there are obviously some people who are pretty upset about some of the aspects of it, but we want to make a difference, and we want to be compassionate, so we're kind of in a listening tour. But one of the things that you would always caution me about is that from the Independent Fiscal Office, they talked about that younger people are leaving the Commonwealth in record numbers, and we're having an in-migration of older people who are coming into the state. So the question I would ask is, we're seeing that right now that seniors, people over 65, of which I'm one of them, are about 17 to 18% of our population, and that's due to increase to 25%. What does that do to the burden of property taxes on that 25%?
The senior issue, and I don't want this to sound like I'm downplaying the senior issue, because I'm not. It's a very real issue. But we're looking at the possibility of putting a plan together that would include some retirement income. Not all retirement income, a portion. The portion of your income, a portion of your retirement that you have not contributed already with taxation. We're looking at doing a portion of that, and I understand the backlash. It sounds like a new tax. It's not really. It's just sort of, you know, doing the uniformity clause across the board. But we look at this as being solely a senior problem, and it's not. I have a neighbor who was 30 years old who walked away from his house because he couldn't keep up with the property taxes, the increase in property taxation. He had an injury. And people don't understand, this is not simply a senior problem. How many young families who would like to buy a home may be able to afford the mortgage, but once you add that property tax to the home, and the other aspect of this is that young homeowners aren't seeing the equity in the homes that they should see in their homes because of the property tax, and the higher the property tax goes, the more it affects the value of the home.
Absolutely.
So we're driving down home values at the same time.
And the more we narrow the base of who pays the tax, so if we go to 25% of the population as seniors, that's a smaller percentage of the population that's paying for the schools. You know, one of the things that we're going to talk about at a future point is we're going to frequently ask questions, and one that we always get is that I've already paid everything, and what that's caused me concern is that we have so many unfunded pension liabilities. The state's got unfunded liabilities. I'm estimating that number to be over $100 billion, of which $75 billion is pensions for CSRS and PSERS. And it's a concern. I often tell people we're just one recession away. You know, the Independent Fiscal Office indicated that with the growth of property taxes every year at about $500 million per year, and that's why this number is a moving target to be able to get rid of it, is that it's increasing the likelihood that the average annual increase in the rate of property tax went from 2.7% per year to 3.2% per year. And school districts have chosen one of two ways to do it. Either pass it on as a higher property tax or to cut programs. What are some of the programs you've seen that have been cut from some of the school districts?
Well, they cut back on music programs. They cut back on auxiliary sporting programs. You know, they keep the mainstays, the football, but not every kid is a football player. Some kids, tennis, And I know, we get the pushback there as well, from people saying, well, we shouldn't have all these sports, we shouldn't have all of this. And, I believe in a well-rounded education, and that's part of it. The arts programs in our schools is part of a well-rounded education. Not every child is a mathematician. Some of our students are artists. Some of our students have talents in other areas. And we should be opening those doors to help those children prepare for a future that may be a part of that. And if you want one of the big cutbacks that we've seen, vocational training. We've cut that incredibly in our schools. When I was in high school, you could go for carpentry, you could go for metalworking, printing, cooking, all these different aspects. And many of the schools have cut back on their vocational training programs extensively.
And we've seen the effects of that in terms of our shortage of tradesmen, persons who are properly qualified.
Right. We have industry complaining that people are graduating from high school, even college, and coming out not being able to go in to that field.
One of the things that I want people to be aware of, the last critical success factor, then we're going to go into the bill. When I was doing this research on all the concerns I had about the property taxes, one of the things that I found, and I think people should be aware of it, is I asked the question as someone who does bankruptcy for a living, helping people avoid bankruptcy, is I said, what happens if a school district is unable to pay its bills? And the answer we got back is, if one school district is unable to pay its bills and it becomes insolvent, the unfunded pension liability of that school, because it's called a cost-sharing program under PSERS, with the multi-employer plan, those unfunded liabilities in those school districts would then get allocated to the remaining school districts. So the point I want to close with on the critical success factors is we all have a vested interest in fixing this. With all of those different issues, we came back over a fairly long period of time of talking to people who opposed one of the other major elimination bills, which we both also still support. But what we decided to do is to go back and talk to those people who were opposed to it to find out what their answers were, what their concerns were. So Jim and I were able to sit down and do that. We did this with a lot of other good friends as well. And we came up with the School Property Tax Elimination Act. It's House Bill 13. And I think one of the important issues is that we said that all school property taxes had to be eliminated. If I were a politician and that were my entire avocation throughout life rather than being a CPA and a retired Marine, I would tell you the reason that people told us that they want all school property taxes eliminated should cause all of us concern, because the loud and clear comment I heard was they don't trust government. Jim, what have you heard?
That's exactly what I heard. In fact, one of the issues we had with 76 and the opposition to 76 was that all the funding went to Harrisburg, and nobody trusts that. And whether or not you believe that's a valid concern or not is indifferent. It's indifferent to the argument. We have to address these concerns. My concern at the time we began to talk about this was we had voted on SB 76 in the Senate, and it had failed in 2015. We had a previous vote on the House version in 2013, and it had failed. And from 2015 to 2017, nothing was happening.
It's interesting to see that this problem is really complicated. So as we get ready to start wrapping some of this up, let's go into specific bill. We talked about why to eliminate property taxes, but Jim made a comment that I want to really hit on, because it's one of the other things that convinced me, is that with property taxes, you're but one life event away from losing your home. And that's something we should always keep up. The other aspect is the independent fiscal office indicated that as soon as property taxes go away, your value of your property will go up. Who benefits? Under our bill, here's what the bill is. It says we're going to create a concept called a local income tax, local personal income tax, and a local sales tax. And what that means is we will increase the personal income tax from 3.07% to 4.92%. And that 1.85% incremental amount is paid by all people who are currently working and would go directly to your local school districts. It would not go to Harrisburg first. There's a 2% increase in the local sales tax on existing sales. So the sales tax would go from 6% to 8%. That would be remitted to the Treasury office, who would then allocate it back to the counties where it originated. And then that county would allocate it to the school districts in the county. And we have a slight expansion of the sales tax, the local sales tax only, which would be 2% on food and clothing. And that's important that you be aware of that. It is not the original 6%, it's only the 2% that would go to the local community. And candidly, we needed to do that because we were finding that property taxes went up by $500 million in 1 year. And so that's the reason for partial of the expansion. There would be no tax on Social Security, and there's a 4.92% tax on retirement income. That's the 3.07% base, and then the 1.85% local. That 1.85% that would go to the local school districts, the 3.07% goes to Harrisburg to take care of the hold harmless arrangements that we do on this property tax elimination bill. Somebody said to me, well, I want that to only go to taking care of schools. Well, in essence, it does, because the state now has a hold harmless requirement that says every school district for a minimum of 3 years will be guaranteed to get the same amount of the property taxes that they had received before. We felt that that was important. On the retirement tax, so it's one thing I really want to emphasize. Any money that you put into the system already as a Pennsylvania resident was already taxed. So when you take that money out, it is not taxed again. We are seeing a major influx of Pennsylvanians, and this is one thing I think is really important to be aware of as a cost driver. The total cost of taking care of us seniors in the Pennsylvania budget is $11.2 billion. Of that $11.2 billion, slightly in excess of $5 billion comes from the federal government. $1.4 billion or so comes from the lottery fund, but $3.9 billion comes out of the general fund, and that number is expected to increase between $1 billion to $1.5 billion per year as we senior citizens who are baby boomers are getting older, and so there's extensive cost. 75% of seniors will save significantly under our bill because your school property tax goes away completely. But I have to tell you, if we don't do this, here's what I want to caution all of us about as we wrap this up. I'm extraordinarily concerned that if we go into a recession, the numbers that we are talking about for paying the past due pension obligations will increase so significantly, we may not be able to afford it. A lot of people believe that a state can't go bankrupt. Jim and I can tell you that that's not accurate. Puerto Rico applied for bankruptcy and filed bankruptcy on May 3rd, 2017. And very sadly, shortly after that, had a horrible hurricane that I think most of us are helping to do what we can to see if we can help Puerto Rico get back. Illinois is likely to be next. There's a couple of myths that happen with property taxes and states going bankrupt and all of these things. Is it likely that something could go bankrupt? It is. But let me tell you about Pennsylvania. We have 3 to 5 years to go before which the political solutions to our problems will be so painful that the solution can't be had. We are a people divided. There are a significant number of people who don't believe that property taxes should be done away with, about over 40%. There's a group of people who feel that they've paid enough money already, shouldn't pay any more. The remaining people for whom other programs put that tax burden on them are choosing their other option, and that's to leave the Commonwealth. If we have enough younger workers leave the Commonwealth, we will find that we will no longer be able to sustain the operations that we have here. The cost of taking care of seniors will continue to explode, and we will likely find ourselves in a situation in the not too distant future, about 12 years from now, where someone will be sitting back saying, we don't have enough money to pay our bills, what are we going to pay? The time to act is now. The time to work is have an open, active conversation as it is right now. And that's why I've left our bill, and Jim Rodkey has been tremendously helpful with me in this, to keep our bill, House Bill 13, open for public comment. You know, if there's one mistake I've made, and I've made many in my life, but if there's one mistake that I've made, the one thing I would tell you is that people have cautioned me that because I'm a CPA, a lot of these financial things come second nature to me, but they don't to most people. So I want to go around the state, and Jim has been helpful in this with the Pennsylvania Property Rights Association, to get this message out and talk. Most things here are negotiable, but if we don't solve it, and if we don't all bind together in unity to solve this problem, we will fail together as well. Jim, thank you so much for being here. I'm honored to call you my friend, and I look forward to this opportunity to go out in the Commonwealth and hopefully end a system of taxation that's been around for over 400 years.
Yes, thank you.